Joining me as executive producer and director David Fincher and stars Jonathan Groff and Holt McCallany. I am pleased to have them here at this table. I have to start on a bit of a somber note, though. I mean, we're just witnessing an extraordinary thing happening, a horrific thing happening. I mean, and the questions that they're asking are the questions that your guys, your characters based on real-life people, are asking. What makes these people do this?
I think that's if anybody has interest in true crime, it's always that, right? It's always that thing that you can't quite touch, you can't quite get at it, you don't understand what makes them do what they do.
And is it insanity or not?
Well, I mean, there's obviously a huge argument against an insanity plea when somebody has plotted so carefully not to be caught.
You know, they certainly the difference in right and wrong.
Of course, you have to know the difference
of sanity.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's always if somebody has gone through the motions and fantasized for long enough, they've worked out all the problems. So, is there an insanity defense there? Probably not.
Mm-hmm. Just based on what you two characters know, what questions would you be asking if you were in Las Vegas? If these two guys, the characters you play, were in Las Vegas? You can't talk to him. He shot himself.
Nobody lives to be in their 60s and suddenly wakes up one day and decides to commit mass murder without any kind of warning signs, without any previous criminal behavior of any kind. So I would be trying to figure out what were the things that led him to that point that he did that.
Which brings me to sort of the subject. What was it that your character, the approach, I don't want to say empathy, but what was the approach that made you say, what's this guy doing? Where's he coming from?
Yeah, it's
You're the young agent who believes there's a better way of trying to figure this out.
I think on the show we're trying to see if we can fake empathy in order to understand the impossible to understand. And I think along the way, we glean information, and the show takes place in the late 70s when all of this information and the idea of even doing this was very new. And they acquire systems of labeling and compartmentalizing the different kinds of killers. But I think ultimately, part of the reason people are so fascinated with serial killers endlessly is because you can ask as many questions as you want to, and I don't know if we'll ever get an answer.
And nor do you know whether they even know.
Right.
Yeah. You, sir.
I'm apologizing in advance.
What is it about you? Maybe we should be talking about you.
Nobody sent me the remake of Breakfast at Tiffany's. It's like
I didn't want you to do that over.
No, I don't know. I can only fall back on my. Well, I can't apologize enough.
Yeah, but we can fall back on some things you've done before and say there is something within you that. Ask yourself, where does aberration come from?
Yeah, I mean, look, certainly. When we were doing the rounds at Quantico and kind of trying to indoctrinate ourselves and sort of look at what it had to offer, you round a corner, under the library, and there's a life-size, either wax or fiberglass rendering of Hannibal Lecter, and obviously John Doe from Seven, those movies came out around the same time, and they were both sort of in the mold of the serial killer as. Wile E. Coyote, super genius, And I think, and as I was talking to the woman who's giving us the tour, she said, well, is this show going to be like Silence of the Lambs? And I thought, no, I want to kind of take that back. I want to not talk about I don't want to talk about the gourmet, opera expert who, to me, these are very sad people who've grown up under horrendous circumstances. This is not to overstate how much empathy or sympathy we should have for them. It's just simply a fact, and it becomes, and we had seen so much, you know, of this sort of literary conceit of there's a very fine line separates the hunters from the hunted. And I really thought it was time to sort of take that back and make it really, the reason that we are fascinated with them is because we're nothing like them. They are unfathomable. We literally can't see what that thing is.
Having looked at a number of them, do they share any common?
Of course, yeah. There's a lot of commonality, and the show is there. It's a series of conversations.
Right. You bought a book. Somebody bought a book, didn't they? And it's based on the book written by a former FBI.
Yes,
you know.
by kind of the king of the profilers.
The king of profiles for the FBI.
Yeah.
You two guys, tell me about the dynamic of the two characters. So that's part of the dynamic of the film, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, here's what there are two guys that these characters are based on, and one of them is not with us any longer, and one of them was a creative consultant with our show. And once we got into kind of trying to divide the mythology, who did what, who went where, who was the first person to say X, it got extremely complicated. And so Joe Penhall, who was the creator and the kind of head writer of the show, he decided I need to be able to divide this legwork as I need in order to be able to dramatize it, because we'll never be able to. And so he was the one who said, I'm going to call this guy this, and I'm going to call this other guy, and then I'm going to make a crazy quilt of whichever sort of behavioral impetus I need.
But when he comes talking about these ideas, your character is what? You're looking at it with skepticism or kind of convince me? This is not my experience, so you got to convince me.
Yes. Well, when we meet Bill Tench, the character that I play, he's in a failing marriage. He has an adopted son who is troubled, with whom he has a difficult relationship, and that's created a lot of problems in his marriage. And he's not somebody that is really interested in the bureaucracy at Quantico. He's not interested in the politics and the brown-nosing, if you will, that he would need to do in order to get a promotion. And so he teaches road school. He travels around the country, and he teaches the latest FBI investigative techniques to local cops. And in a sense, he's running away. I think of him as kind of floundering. He's almost kind of forgotten why it was so important that he be an FBI agent. And what happens when Holden, Jonathan's character, comes into my life is that, you know, his youth and his passion and his enthusiasm and his intelligence really kind of revitalize me in a sense and make me remember what it was that I loved about being. Yes, sir.
Right. And what is it that you have, other than youth and enthusiasm? I mean, is it a new idea? What has made you different?
I think that one of the things that's interesting about the show is when you meet Holden in the first episode, he's a little lost. The very first scene in the show, he's in a hostage negotiation situation, and a guy shoots himself in the face. And he goes to the FBI and he says, I did everything by the book, and somebody died, and I'm really confused, and perhaps we're going about this in the wrong way. And I think it's sort of symbolic of Hoover was running the FBI up until the early 70s, and there was this sort of black and white vision of what crime was. It's like, go get the bad guys, and then we've succeeded. And the era of the 70s was coming into the FBI a little bit, and Holden meets this girl who's getting her PhD and studying sociology. And so he gets his mind kind of blown and has this sort of existential crisis and is looking for purpose and meaning and a better way to run his work at the FBI, and gets stuck with this guy teaching behavioral science at road school all over the country, and through a strange set of circumstances finds himself sitting across the room from Ed Kemper, who we now know as a serial killer.
Here's a scene.
If you want to, that is. I mean, we don't have to talk about anything at all if you don't want to.
Why are you so tense? You're tense right now.
No, I'm not tense.
Now, hold that thought and take a look at this. This is Holt's character talking to Jonathan about the same inquiry. Here it is.
Well, it's been a process.
Okay, look, there's no doubt whatever happened in there was a profound experience for you. But I need you to understand that whatever you think, there's a distinct possibility that he's manipulating you.
Okay, so let's just talk about the scene.
Okay.
First, you. I mean, with the reputation you have for taking more than one take.
We did 2 or 3 in this.
How many did you do? How many?
It's so funny because that actually, the scene with Ed Kemper is a perfect example, I think, of the multiple takes, because we did that scene over 2 days. And
that little scene over 2 days?
Well, it's longer than that.
Oh, God.
It's longer than that. But I was doing, so there's a lot of comedy built in, or there's a potential for a lot of comedy built into this sort of wide-eyed innocent agent across the table from this giant person who's so dangerous.
Moving the papers, all the signs of it. Yeah.
And I was doing all this shtick, right, in the takes, and we were doing it over and over again, and I was finding all this like shtick or whatever. And that line where he says, "Why are you so tense?" And I say, "I'm not tense." Previously, in the previous takes, I've been doing all this like shtick of I'm not tense and like doing all this stuff. And David was like, "What if you do nothing?" This was at like the middle of the second day. And to me, it's changed the whole sort of energy of that moment. It created something more realistic. It took away like the actory comedic shtick that I was doing, and it feels really honest. And we found that after a bunch of takes.
That's why he's David Fincher.
I mean, that's one of the millions of reasons of why he's David Fincher, but yeah, that's one of them.
Yeah. You've worked with him in a couple of small roles, haven't you?
Yes, I was in David's first movie, Alien 3, with Sigourney Weaver, all the way back in 1991. And then I also had a role in Fight Club. But this was the first time that I was invited back in a major part. So for me, it was a great honor.
Here's what you said. It almost made all the years of struggle worth it. I felt like I'd graduated in a way.
That's absolutely correct. And I've said this before in interviews, for me to have the privilege of playing a character, Bill Tench is a very interesting character. And one of the wonderful things about television, Charlie, is that you get to explore a character in much greater detail than you would in a 2-hour movie or a 3-hour play. You just have more time. You have more real estate. You can find yourself in many different circumstances.
And that's a really important thing, and because we had cast Jonathan, and it was incredibly important to me that I don't have the wet blanket, that I don't have the guy who's just going, pshaw, I'm not interested in this, or I'm done. I needed to have an actor who could be Jonathan 20 years later, who could be the guy who the monolithic bureaucracy has taken it out of him. He's hit his head against the wall. He's got a callus, and he's kind of going. And so, in order to do that, I need an actor who has enormous sensitivity. And working with Holt as many times as I have, I was like, I keep wishing that I would have a part for him that had more, that had string theory. It was attached to other ideas, and to be able to actually offer somebody something where you say, hey, we could be doing this 5 years from now. Is there, are you ready to dig? Let's excavate. And
did you see this as a television series rather than a 2-hour film?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I learned my lesson with Zodiac.
What lesson did you learn from Zodiac?
You can ask a lot of an audience, but, 2 hours and 45 minutes and no closure is probably, yes, get a babysitter. Yes, find parking. Yes, wait in line. Sit and have, people with their phones on in your peripheral vision and concentrate for 2 hours and 45 minutes is asking a lot.
That's asking a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I also think that this is, it's conversations, conversations. And
we love conversations, don't we?
Of course. And I'm actually, I'm eternally, it's very difficult when you're an executive producer. You have to find other directors because you literally can't direct the whole thing. 10 hours is just, it's too much. There's too many. So in finding the other directors that we found, there are certain people when you give them an 11-page scene that takes place at a table not unlike this, and say, well, there's this movement in the first 2 pages, and then there's this pivot, and then it moves over. You know, they well, can't I crash something? Can't somebody jump through the window? Can we have
They
some?
don't trust conversation.
No, it's terrifying. Yeah. The guys that we found, interestingly enough, come, you know, some from documentaries, and another one was a writer who had worked on the show Borgen and had made a film about a hijacking that had some of the most riveting scenes in it that were just people talking into a speakerphone.
You know, when I created this program, I said our conceit is that we believe that people love conversation.
Yeah.
And that they'll want to see it if it's real, engaging,
Yeah.
passionate,
Yeah.
you know, that they'll be drawn to it. And you don't need a fancy set. You don't need anything. You just need two people or more that are engaged by.
There are acts and movements in the way that people move their agenda and try to understand and look for clarification. There are and that stuff can be as interesting as people running through the street showing their badges
cars
and
or whatever they have to do.
Yeah.
Did you want him because he was so great as King George III? Is that why you wanted him?
I hadn't seen that. No, you know, it's funny.
You hadn't seen that.
I met Jonathan on when we were casting The Social Network, and he came in and he was amazing and riveting, and it was for Sean Parker, and I thought, the one thing that Jonathan doesn't have access to that I have to have is that he has to have a little venality. And this is a guy who has, you can't even fake it. You know, it's just like
you couldn't put him as a venal character.
He just has no, I mean, there was a little bit of the oily salesman that just a tiny bit, you know, and the thing
in Sean Parker.
Yeah, I just need, I mean, not that, this is no offense to Sean Parker, and I apologize, but because I've not met Sean Parker, but the character I needed somebody who could work a room and kind of seat two people in proximity and know he was going to make 10%. You know, I say this often, but I think part of what makes a great performance is, at some level, you know, you shoot a 14-hour day, you shoot 6 days a week. At some point, people are going to be exhausted. People are going to be, and there has to be an inherent thing in the actor that you can't beat out of them with a tire iron, that you know is always going to be, it's always underneath that surface. You know, curiosity, decency, you know, and with Holden, you know, I think people mistakenly think of it as earnestness, but what it is it's a hunger to be better. It's a hunger to understand, and you know, Jonathan naturally has that. He's a great student.
It's great to meet you.
Thank you so much, Charlie.
Great to have you here.
Very nice to meet you.
Great to see you again, Jonathan.
Pleasure.
As well, sir.
Oh, it's good.
Congratulations.
Thank you.